Please be seated. Today, we are celebrating the feast of Christ the King. This is a relatively recent addition to our church calendar. It was created in 1925 by Pope Pius XI in the wake of World War I and as response to secularism and ultra-nationalism. It was established as a day to reflect on Christ, who has power over all of creation, to put into perspective the powers of this world in contrast to the kingdom of Jesus. When Pilate questions Jesus, Jesus explains that his kingdom is not of this world. His kingdom does not operate in the same way as structures of human creation. Christ the King Sunday, through the lens of John's Gospel, invites us to reflect on earthly governance through the lens of Christ's eternal and just reign. We see a critique of worldly power and a hope for the transformative kingdom of Jesus. So when Pilate questions Jesus, it becomes clear that earthly rulers like Pilate operate within a constrained sphere of authority. Jesus responds, "My kingdom is not from this world," highlights Pilate's power, and by extension, all human governance, and that it is subordinate to the sovereignty of God. Jesus acknowledges the reality of earthly kingdoms, but makes it clear that his kingdom transcends human institutions. This challenges the ultimate legitimacy of any earthly government when placed against the eternal reign of God. Pilate's confusion over Jesus' kingship underscores a fundamental misunderstanding of power. Pilate expects a king to be someone who exercises military might, political control. Yet, Jesus' kingdom is one of servanthood, sacrifice, and truth. This disconnect reveals the often misguided priorities of earthly rulers who equate power with domination rather than stewardship or justice. And we are challenged, as Pilate was, to reorient our understanding of power and allegiance. Power is not found in power over others, as Pilate would believe. For Jesus, for us as Christians, power is in belonging. That all beings are beloved of God, and we belong to one another. The system that has made Pilate wealthy and powerful is a system of conquering, of violence, and power over one another. Whereas Jesus' power is belonging to one another. It's a very different way of creating community and society. Jesus' kingdom does not separate us. Jesus as King draws us into our belovedness and belonging together. Whenever we find ourselves drifting into a mindset of separation, of judgment, or exploitation, we are acting as subjects of Pilate's worldly power. which would have us compare ourselves to one another, be suspicious of others, judge others, or at worst, project unworthiness onto others. When we act from love, from belonging, from belovedness, we align ourselves as subjects of Jesus' kingdom. It's our understanding of the incarnation, the idea that God dwells in each of us, that grounds us as subjects to Christ within one another. To recognize Christ as our King is not a far-off, distant, or heavenly aspiration. It is clearly seeing Christ in all and acting from that seeing. Our baptismal vow to seek and serve Christ in all is the foundation for understanding Christ the King. When we serve Christ the King, we serve one another, subjects to one another. We recognize Christ within me, honoring and serving Christ within you, reaching out, love to love. Jesus asks us to be aware of the powers at play and understand the impacts of our seeing. Pilate struggles to be aware. He responds with confusion, with frustration. Jesus' kingdom is about clearly seeing belovedness and holding ourselves responsible for respecting the dignity of all and loving our neighbors. And this is uncomfortable and hard, because there's been millennia plus of human power, of human-powered systems that have built a robust global economy which exploits the poor, oppresses the vulnerable, and tells us we're not worthy unless we have certain things. That economy wants us to try to be better than our neighbor, to keep up with the Joneses. But Jesus' kingdom is one in which we love our neighbor. Being a subject in Jesus' kingdom is about clearly seeing our belovedness, clearly seeing the belovedness of each person, and as much as possible, making decisions based on that seeing. So what does that look like on a daily basis? What does it look like to see the belovedness of a stranger? What does it feel like to belong to that stranger? Have you ever had that feeling? Have you ever been so open that you've risked talking with a stranger? Probably. And it's never as hard as it really seems. Or have you even risked talking with your neighbor? More than just a polite wave and hello. We sit side by side on Sundays. Do you feel a sense of belonging with the person next to you in the pew? Yeah, this is a pretty special place for practicing belonging. And we can deepen it just a little bit more, kind of emphasize the point. I invite you, and really do this, turn to your neighbor, someone near you, and say, I belong to you, you belong to me. And do this one more time. Turn to somebody else nearby you. When we participate in the kingdom of Christ, we align with this belonging, with this belovedness. And it's so powerful. Jesus' kingdom is more than a handshake, a smile, and a cup of coffee. It is about kneeling side by side, taking from the same cup, recognizing that we all receive communion together, no matter who you are. That's a radical act that aligns us with Jesus' kingdom. It's about listening to one another, sharing our struggles, our sorrows, our griefs, and hearing the person next to us also praying for our struggling spouse or child or parent. All of us belonging and lifting that up together. Jesus' kingdom reveals God in all of us together, and we illuminate the world more brightly. For listening to that, for seeing that, and for allowing that to shine. Christ, the King, orients us to a way of being that is about belovedness, not power, about belonging to, not status over. The kingdom of God is not about what other people say, as Pilate is subject to. The kingdom of God is about what love calls us to in the face of this world. And to choose to be a subject to Christ is to choose to be a subject to Christ in the other. To embrace a vision that is more loving, hopeful, just. A vision of clearly seeing. May we all clearly see together.